Far too often, what I see people do is they unrack and they try to walk out immediately. You're going to find that if you rush your walkout, everything you just did with that setup, taking your time to get into position, to stack yourself, you can throw a lot of that off, because the moment you unrack and walk out, as the weight is maybe still bobbling, you're now losing your position, you're losing your balance, and you're making the walkout a lot harder than what it needs to be. What's up, guys? Marcellus Williams. I am a full-time powerlifting coach, as well as a 74 kg and 83 kg powerlifter for the past 10 years. I've coached athletes all the way from the beginner level to the world stage. And today I'm here at elitefts, and we're going to be discussing your squat setup. So as I stated, we're going to be going over the squat setup. And in my opinion, this is going to be the most important aspect of your squat. It's going to determine a lot of things: how the weight feels on your back, the way you're able to first set yourself up so that you can have the best brace possible. There's a lot that goes into the setup where if you get this done correctly, you're going to make sure your squat is a lot easier. Everybody's focused on, like, hey, how fast do I drop into the hole? Everyone's focused on different things to make the squat just feel stronger when they're actually executing the lift. But if you get the setup down right first, it's going to lead to a much smoother execution overall. So, and this is really true for all three lifts, but I would say out of all of them, second to the bench press, but probably when it comes to the setup, the squat is very, very important. So with that being said, we already know that for most people, everyone has different grip widths, right? There's people who grip very close, there's people who grip very wide. For the sake of this video, I'm just gonna say, whatever your grip is, to stick with that. I recommend starting around about shoulder width, and then you can kind of play with how close within that or outside that you wanna be based upon what's comfortable for you. Typically speaking, the heavier lifter you are, the wider your back is, probably the wider your grip's going to be. And then the smaller framed you are, probably the closer your grip's going to be. The thing that I want you guys to keep in mind, though, when it comes to picking your grip width, is the goal is not necessarily to just feel like super cramped up together as tight as possible. Like if I have my hands here and I try to get into this type of setup, it's pretty much impossible. It feels very uncomfortable. It's unnecessarily close and it's way too tight. And we're not trying to create tension from the standpoint of just what feels tight. That's what I like to call pseudo tension. We're trying to create tension from a place where, okay, once we grab the bar, we're able to get under it and create the best shelf possible that we can maintain throughout the entirety of the set. So for me, in terms of where my grip width is, I like to start where I have the end of my thumb right where the knurling meets the smooth. And then from here, I kind of adjust my grip out just a little bit based upon about what feels good for me. Just due to the fact that I have a relatively wide back compared to the rest of my frame, that's what feels comfortable for me. So once you have your grip width set, what I recommend people do is actually push the bar up against the rack. Because sometimes depending on what type of rack you're on, if you start here, once you try to get into position, the bar ends up kind of sliding towards the front of the rack anyway. So I like to already have it there, just so that way it's already locked into a really good position. From here, once you have your grip width set, what I recommend to people is don't feel like you have to squeeze the bar as tightly as possible immediately, right? If I already have a super tight grip right here, even though I can get to a tight position, I might not be able to mobilize into the bar as well as what I like. So what I instead tell people to do is apply pressure with your palms, right? So even though I'm not gripping the bar completely, I am applying as much pressure as I can with my palms already. And then as I slide into position where I can mobilize a lot easier from this point, that's when I'll tighten my grip as much as I can while setting up. Now, I am very big on emphasizing tightening the grip once I'm at this point. Some people have their fingers a little bit more relaxed, and that's fine. But you want to try to apply as much tension to the bar as you can, because tension from your grip is going to lead to tension everywhere else. Once I am in position, I tighten my grip, it's going to allow me to have a better upper back tightness as far as retracting, and it's going to lead to tension everywhere else once we get through the rest of the setup. So that being said, I have my hands in position, applying pressure with the palms. As I'm getting under the bar, what I'm thinking about is squeezing my upper back as tightly against the bar as I can. You can think about it simply like retracting the scapula, the upper back against the bar. Because a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll kind of get under the bar kind of passively. But if we're trying to create this tension, then you really want to engage by retracting that upper back as you get into position here. Now, once I am in this position, and I have this tension on the bar, I'm not trying to unrack right here. What you guys will be able to see from the side is that I'm in a relatively extended position right now. My hips aren't directly under my torso, which isn't the strongest or more stable position to be in. So I'll show you guys an example of what sometimes happens with people. They'll get the bar, and they'll get their back set, and they'll be in a position like this, where as you guys can see, my hips are relatively behind my torso, and they'll try to unrack in this type of position. And now they're in this really extended position, which, mind you, being in this extended position is not bad. We're going to have extension in the low bar squat no matter what. But if I'm already starting off this extended, then when I try to squat from here, I can basically run out of room and space where it becomes very difficult to even try and hit depth. So what we want to focus on is actually stacking ourselves under the bar correctly. So there's a lot of different cues that people use for this. They'll say, oh, you want to draw your ribs down. There's things of that nature. I'm going to keep it very simple. Once I'm under the bar, I'm simply going to walk my hips under my torso so I can be in a stacked position. And then from there, I'll show you guys what we're going to do next. So once I've got this upper back tightness set, what I'm going to do is walk my hips to be more directly under my torso. This allows me to be in a more stacked position. And you can just see that because of the amount of tension that I have, the bar basically already wants to just pop off the rack, which of course with more weight, you won't have to worry about that. But from this position, once I'm set where my hips are under my torso and I could easily just stand up and pop the weight off the rack, what I'm going to actually recommend a lot of you do first is exhale. This goes back to what people talk about as far as drawing their ribs down. What I'm gonna do is exhale as hard as I can, and I'm gonna feel my core tension up. And what this does is simply further stack me. I now have a lot of tension in my upper back. I have tension in my core. I'm not bracing yet. I'm not inhaling to brace yet. I'm simply exhaling to create this tension. Once I unrack and I walk the weight out, you guys can see now, I'm far more stacked than if I would have just unracked the weight in that super extended position. From here, now that my upper back is tight, I've got my feet planted, and I have my core in the tension position, now I'm going to inhale into my core, because the whole purpose of that exhale is to get my core tight. Now I inhale to brace into that. You're especially going to feel this whenever you're wearing a belt because of the intra-abdominal pressure that it creates. So now I inhale, and then from here, of course, I can squat. And as you guys can see, hitting depth is a lot easier to do with this stacked position versus if I'm starting really extended, I get a little bit restricted at the bottom versus when I'm in this more stacked position, which I've already created, right, before I unwrap, hitting depth becomes a lot easier. Now, there's other things we need to consider with the setup that's gonna go into, when we're walking out, how we're setting up with our feet, and even where we're looking as far as our head position. But I just wanted to show that aspect of it first because that's the most important. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, well, Marcellus, there's some people where they actually do decide to do something like a pre-hinge, right? Even if they get in this really stacked setup position, what they often end up doing is sitting their hips back first a little bit and then squatting. That's not something that I recommend for the vast majority of people, because ultimately what we're trying to do is be in the best position possible for the knees and hips to break at the same time. That's going to give us the best center of mass as far as keeping the barbell over midfoot. It's going to allow you to feel more stable into the hole, and it's going to allow you to feel like you can really stay into your quads. Because essentially what can happen is if somebody is biasing sitting back first, even if they create this stacked position, then all you're doing is sacrifice the stacked position you made by sitting back first. And what often happens when people do this is they bias sitting back first before the knees even start to break. And that can put them in this really folded over position, which can be a lot harder to fight through. You're essentially making the squat more of a good morning, which for a lot of you is gonna happen anyway due to your leverages, but you don't wanna make that worse by emphasizing sitting back so much first and then ending up in this position at the bottom, which can be a lot harder to fight through, especially for those of you where you may have longer legs relative to your torso. At the same time, if you're somebody where you're super extended, you're super upright like this, and then you just start with the knees, you have the knees tracking a lot, what often ends up happening is once you're at the bottom, the bar's gonna dump on you anyway, because that bar is trying to find midfoot, it's trying to find that center of mass, and it's gonna force you in that position to dump anyway. So, we're not looking for either extreme. We don't necessarily want to be in this position where we're trying to necessarily be quote unquote as upright as possible the whole time, because there has to be some of that natural forward lean as we get towards the bottom of the squat. And at the same time, we're not trying to sit back excessively and turn the squat into more of a good morning. We want to actively feel our quads throughout the entirety of the movement, which will go into the next part of the setup. So once again, it's a refresher, applying pressure with the palms, mobilizing upper back by getting upper back as tight as far as possible by retracting. Once I'm in this position, I can also tension my grip on the bar, which will allow me to have more tension in my upper back as well. You can do a little false unrack to make sure that the bar feels like where you want it to be on your back. Sometimes you might notice, maybe you're getting in position and you end up being a little bit uneven. So when you unrack, you do a false unrack, you feel that weight doesn't feel centered. So this can allow you to get into a more centered position. Not that the bar needs to be perfectly centered by any means. We're not symmetrical. Some of us are gonna have more of a tilt than others. I myself have a slight tilt, but I know what it feels like when the bar is sitting appropriately on my back with that false unrack. So from here, like I said, we're gonna exhale, unrack, we're gonna walk out, and then we're set here. Now, in terms of the actual unrack itself, there's a lot of different opinions on how people should go about this. In my opinion, what matters more before you start to unrack is simply when you do unrack the weight, let the weight settle for a second. Far too often, what I see people do is they unrack and they try to walk out immediately. And in truth, with lighter weight, that's not gonna be a big deal. Most are gonna be able to get away with that. But what you guys will find as you start to get closer to whatever your max is, and it's always relative to the individual, 300 pounds, 400 pounds, 500 pounds, you're going to find that if you rush your walkout, everything you just did with that setup, taking your time to get into position, to stack yourself, you can throw a lot of that off, because the moment you unrack and walk out, as the weight is maybe still bobbling, you're now losing your position, you're losing your balance, and you're making the walkout a lot harder than what it needs to be. So what I strongly recommend for everybody to do is to simply let that weight settle for a second. And the stronger you get, from 300 to 400 pounds, from 400 to 500 pounds, 500 to 600 pounds, 700 to 800 pounds, wherever your strength level may be, the more this is going to matter. I coach quite a few lifters who actually squat in the 800 pound range, Ashton Ruska, Jamar Royster, Bob Matthews, and for all of them, this has probably been one of the simplest cues ever, is simply, hey, when you unrack, let the weight settle. Because the more weight that's on the bar, the more whip that's going to happen with that. So you want to give yourself time to let that settle before walking out. But if you're somebody who only squat 300 or 400 pounds, this is still a good thing to do, because it lets you feel more secure with the setup before walking out. So let's move position. I'm gonna unrack, let the weight settle, then I'm going to walk out. As far as the walkout, simple, 1, 2, and then 3 to get yourself settled. If you have to kind of, pitter pat on your feet a little bit to get them right where they need to be, that's fine. But something that I recommend for most people is you don't want to have a whole bunch of multiple steps, because with each step you're taking, that's just wasting a little bit of energy, right? And that's the best part. If you've already taken your time to let the weight settle once you've unracked, you feel stable already. So then it's easy to just be like, okay, 1, 2, and then the third part is just getting your feet adjusted where you want them to be. Now, from this position here, we want to focus on foot pressure. So the best part about stacking yourself correctly when you unrack is, just due to the nature of where the bar is at, especially as a low bar squatter, you're already going to feel a good amount of pressure on your heel. So that should be relatively secured. What you're going to want to focus on next is grabbing the floor with your pinky toe, right? So your pinky toe feels secure. And then the final portion is driving your big toe into the floor. Now, when it comes to why we're doing this, is even if you're just standing straight right now, if you guys watch the video, if you just stand up straight right now my foot is just flat, no problem. But the moment I drive my big toe into the floor, I create more quad tension. You will feel your knee lock harder, and you will feel your quad create more tension by driving that big toe down. This does a couple of things for us. One, lets you just feel like you're getting more of that quad engagement, so that you can appropriately feel that throughout the entirety of the squat. Because no matter how you're leveraged, it doesn't matter if you're somebody where you have very short femurs, very long femurs. The quad is the primary muscle of this movement regardless. It's your primary mover, right? So we want to feel like our quads are engaged, and that big toe allows us to do it. The other thing it's going to allow us to do, because we're now in this stacked position where, once again, as I said earlier, we want to focus on the knees and hips breaking at the same time. So once again, if I'm somebody where I'm biasing a lot towards my hips, that's not great. But if I have this big toe pressure and I'm already stacked in position, what often is going to happen is, as I simply allow my knees to track over my toes, right? And as you try to shove your knees forward, so meaning if your toes are more forward, your knees will track more forward. If your toes are more out, your knees will track more out. As your knees track, naturally the hips end up breaking at the same time anyway. So you have this nice balance where, okay, I've got this big toe pressure, I feel my quads, my knees are tracking well over my toes, and as they track, my hips naturally break. You get that natural forward lean in the hole and can reverse back up. So this will allow you to be more quote unquote upright. Not that we're trying to force this upright position by keeping the chest up, but it just allows you to maintain a more stacked position overall. How chest up you are or aren't is going to depend on you. People have a little bit more extension, your chest might be a little bit higher. People where you tend to be a little bit more neutral, you might you know, see your chest fall a bit more, and that's fine. But relatively speaking, you're gonna be more stacked throughout the entirety of the lift. So once we're back in the position where we've already unracked, we've walked out. Like I said, taking the time to find that foot pressure. So my heel's already set. I grab the floor of my pinky toe, I drive that big toe down, and now I'm simply thinking about, okay, just let my knees track over my toes. I'm not thinking about having to sit back aggressively. Just, all right, just simply squat. Let the knees track over the toes, hips breaking out at the same time, and you drive back up. Now, in terms of the actual execution of the squat, that could be its own entirely separate video. But the main thing that I tell people to think about is once you've walked out, once you have your feet rooted, you've got that big toe pressure, and you actually inhale to brace, as those knees are tracking, think about pushing into the floor. So we're not just sitting down. Since I have this big toe pressure and I feel this pressure in my feet, as my knees are tracking, I am pushing into the floor, almost like I'm loading a spring. That way, once I hit depth, and the way that I feel like I'm pushing into the floor on the way down, I'm now pushing that floor away from myself. And that's really the only thing that I think about when it comes to the actual execution of the squat, because you've taken care of everything else setup-wise already, right? That's the whole thing. If you try to, for example, stack yourself more after you've already unracked the bar, that's gonna be very difficult to do when you have actual weight on it. When it's just the barbell itself, yeah, sure, even if I unrack in this, you know, non-stack position, once I walk out, sure, I can just stack myself back up, right? But good luck doing that with 300, 400, 500 pounds on your back. So that's the whole reason why we want to be in the stack position first before we unrack, because it makes the execution of the squat a lot easier. Once I've walked out, all I have to think about is rooting my feet, bracing, pushing into the floor, push the floor away. And that's it.